This is 757 Saturday Sports Talk with Matt Hatfield and Coach Ed Young on ESPN Radio 94.1.
757 Saturday Sports Talk is powered by Larry King Law. If you're injured in an accident, you call 757-INJURED for Larry King. With the coach, Ed Young, I am Matt Hatfield, and Ed Young has poisoned yet another team as he, for some reason, I don't know why, decided to pick Premier League today, soccer, and he took Man United to lose to Everton. Well, Man United won 3-1. So whoever he takes in these games today, folks, between Clemson, Notre Dame, and Virginia Tech Liberty, just go the other way. But you do want to take the advice of our next guest because he's one of the very best in the business. He is the founding editor of the ACC Sports Journal, ACCSports.com, contributor to The Athletic Carolina, and syndicated radio host of The David Glenn Show, DavidGlennShow.com. We say hello to our pal David Glenn here on ESPN Radio 94.1. How are you, my friend?
I am doing great, Matt. Coach, good to be with you as well. Big day in college football. The ACC likes when that happens.
Yeah, good morning to you, also to David. And as we start this interview with you, let me just say I'm a big Notre Dame homer, so careful what you say.
Well, Coach, I'm an Irish Catholic boy who was raised in the Philadelphia area, who has lots of relatives and friends who attended the university right there by Touchdown Jesus. So,
okay, so
we may be kindred spirits in a sense.
Okay, so good. We both know who's picking Notre Dame.
I like the Irish's chances much better today than I would in a rematch if there is one in the ACC title game.
Yeah, because Trevor Lawrence will likely be suited up for them. They're the consensus, if you will, top pick in the next NFL draft, and he's one of the Heisman favorites along with Justin Fields of Ohio State. In place of him, though, DJ Uiagalelei, and he's very, very good. Obviously was a top recruit there. And I want to get to that, though, right off the bat here, David. We'll also tackle Tech Liberty with you and some other things involving the ACC for football and basketball. You know, not only do they have Lawrence out, they're missing about potentially four guys on defense. A stud at linebacker in James Skalski. We know defensive tackle Tyler Davis, the Sam nickel linebacker Mike Jones Jr. They're going to be out. They'll be without Xavier Thomas for the first half because he was ejected for targeting in the second half of last week's comeback win over Boston College. So, I mean, defensively, they're missing some key cogs. Is it going to be more about Clemson on defense, or is it going to have to be Notre Dame raising its offensive level to capitalize on that?
Yeah, it's probably a combination of those things. And you mentioned James Skalski. For those who don't know, obviously losing 4 of 11 starters on either side of the ball, nobody, not even Clemson, is going to avoid some kind of a drop-off. But we've heard the phrase, defensive quarterback used. James Skalski is that. He's sort of the alpha male and just the in-your-face, smart playmaking, making sure his teammates are avoiding mental mistakes. So you're without your real quarterback on offense in Trevor Lawrence. You're without your pseudo-defensive quarterback in James Skalski. But the reason I say it's a combination is, for those who haven't seen Notre Dame, the bottom line is this. They have a championship-caliber defense for Brian Kelly this year. They have maybe the best offensive line in all of college football. I mean, they are really good up front with several who will end up in the NFL. They run the ball well as a result. But their veteran quarterback, Ian Book, has not been good in the passing game. He utilizes his running backs and his tight ends, but the Irish, until recently, have had very little production from their wide receivers, and that sometimes can limit your ability to be a balanced offense. They're going to have to be balanced. Ian Book will have to play better tonight against the Tigers than he has in the past in some of these big games where, they lost at Georgia in the regular season last year. They got crushed by Clemson 30-3 2 years ago in the college football playoff semifinals. They need the best version of Ian Book to balance out that offense if they're going to spring the upset tonight.
Dave, also on this, people say about these injuries, but I look at the Clemson team in this manner. They have a ton of backups that on most college teams, and even some of the ranked college teams, would be starters and be very effective starters.
Agreed.
That's how good they are. Notre Dame, yeah, but if they have to go too deep into their lineup, no. They got too many younger guys. Also, so many times Clemson is hearing about Lawrence. Look at the kid DJ steps in there, to me, didn't miss a beat. And you don't think these backups that are getting a chance to start now are not going to be hungry against a team like Notre Dame on the road at Notre Dame? You have to factor that in. Of course, we all know the adrenaline leaves quickly after the game starts. But I think these guys would be primed and ready to go. Now, the question that I do want to tack onto there also is high scoring, low scoring. In your mind, if it's high scoring, does that favor Clemson? Low scoring, Notre Dame's got to keep it down because you said Booker is not going to set no passing records.
Yeah, I think lower scoring probably favors Notre Dame. I just don't know if the passing game is enough to win a shootout at Notre Dame. That offensive line is so good and so big and strong that even though you're right about Clemson's backups, they have a chance to control the ball. They have a chance to have those, 10 or more plays for 80 yards against a Clemson defense that, remember, was vulnerable enough against Boston College that the Tigers were down 28-13 into the third quarter before coming back to beat the Eagles. Well, Notre Dame's better than Boston College, and in some areas much better than Boston College. But to your point about backups, it's weird to say this statement about somebody who is only 50 years old, 50. But Dabo Swinney could make an argument already at 50 that he is the best football coach in the history of the Atlantic Coast Conference. Now, obviously, Bobby Bowden of Florida State would be his main competition. But this is a league that's been around for 70 years. And the reason I bring up Dabo is that he is one of the only coaches I've ever seen, along with Bobby Bowden of Florida State, who essentially just keeps signing top 5 and top 10 recruiting classes on the front end, so that when Heisman candidate Trevor Lawrence is unavailable, 5-star from California quarterback DJ Uiagalelei is not only ready to step in, but is the second-half star leading a comeback to beat Boston College last week as a true freshman who didn't expect that, of course, until the days leading into that game. Dabo's a recruiting superpower on the front end. He already has 2 national titles. He has 5 straight college football playoff trips. He has 6 ACC titles in 12 seasons there. He is one of the best coaches in ACC football history, and you don't get there unless you recruit your depth chart to the point that you were describing, Coach. And that's why the Tigers, of course, have a chance, even though they're a little bit of a watered-down version of themselves tonight.
Yeah, and when you look at a situation like this, everybody says, oh, my God, they don't have Trevor Lawrence and they're playing a ranked Notre Dame team at Notre Dame. They're in trouble. To me, and I'm not a football coach, I have a hard enough time trying to be the basketball coach that I am. I don't think in football one guy makes it. A quarterback, yes, can make a big difference. But when you have a lot around him, a lot around that position, and you have, like they said, DJ came in there, that their only worry rate really is we got to stop. We got to do what we do, but we got to take away what Notre Dame does, which is your basic game plan in any game. And I think that's how Clemson comes into this. I don't think they're worried that we don't have Trevor Lawrence. I don't see that at all. And I think, Kelly is pretty smart at Notre Dame, too. Hey, look, just because they don't have Lawrence doesn't mean it's a cakewalk for us. There's other things they do that we have to stop. Now, the other thing that scares me is Notre Dame, I hate to say this, against top 10 teams in the last whatever years, 8-28. I think that since Lou Holtz has been gone. That does not bode well.
You're right. And I think Ian Book, for example, as the quarterback, his record against teams that ended the season in the national top 25 is 3 wins and 3 losses. The wins were in years where Northwestern had a really good year, Syracuse had a really good year, Navy had a really good year. And those are not exactly brand name superpowers in college football. The losses were Clemson and Michigan and Georgia. And, you could apply to Ian Book what you could apply to a degree to Brian Kelly over his 11 years as Notre Dame's head coach. I give him a lot of credit. I mean, nobody's won a national title at Notre Dame since 1988. And Brian Kelly got Notre Dame to the BCS title game in 2012. Now, they were crushed by Alabama, but he got them to the national title game. And 2 years ago, as I mentioned, he got them all the way to the college football playoff semifinals. Again, they were crushed by Clemson. So they've reached this tier where, they're not quite the Newt Rockne glory days or even the Lou Holtz glory days. But, man, you get to those high-profile games, there's only about 6 to 10 programs in the country that can say they've played in those games over the last decade or so. So credit to Brian Kelly for getting the Irish this far. But, yes, to get viewed at that next level, you got to win these kinds of games tonight.
We're talking with David Glenn of The David Glenn Show, ACC Sports Journal, and The Athletic here on 757 Saturday Sports Talk on ESPN Radio 94.1, previewing Clemson, Notre Dame tonight. Got some local flavor in that matchup with Sheridan Jones and Jordan Williams, both out of the 757 area for the Clemson Tigers. And, of course, Jeremiah Owusu, a projected first-round pick, the rock of that Notre Dame defense. And as we turn our attention now to the Virginia Tech-Liberty matchup, yeah, who would have thought, David, we'd be talking about Virginia Tech-Liberty in November, and it's Liberty that's the team that's undefeated and ranked, not the Hokies of Virginia Tech. Yeah, they have Khalil Juice Herbert. He's number 4 in the country, or I should say Virginia Tech is number 4 in the country in rushing yards, but their defense is giving up 30.5 points per game, so you don't know which Hokies defense is going to show up. They've had some guys out with COVID protocols and all that, and Liberty is unbeaten. They got the Auburn transfer, Malik Willis at quarterback, playing terrific. But their combined record of opponents thus far, just 4-28. Does that worry you more, or would you be more worried about the inconsistencies for Virginia Tech on defense and knowing that, hey, just a couple years ago, this Tech team did lose to a school that was an in-state opponent in Old Dominion that was not from a Power 5 conference?
Yeah, Matt, it's funny. This week, I do a whole bunch of shows around the country, and of course, I knew that the number one game that we'd be discussing in every show, no matter where I did it, Florida, Boston, in between, of course I knew, I'm smart enough to know Clemson Notre Dame would have been the number one point of conversation. But the second most discussed game related to the ACC this week is the one that you just mentioned. And not just from shows in Virginia. I mean, I did one this morning here in North Carolina, and it was Liberty at Virginia Tech. And it was, wow, the Flames are still undefeated. And, hey, Virginia Tech's been explosive offensively, but not quite as good defensively as in most years, as you just suggested. My number one area to watch is that Liberty has never seen anything like the Virginia Tech offensive line they're going to see tonight or today. Bottom line is Notre Dame might have the best offensive line in the country. Virginia Tech probably has the second best offensive line this year in the Atlantic Coast Conference. They're big, they're athletic, they're mean, they're smart. Khalil Herbert's a heck of a talent, the Kansas transfer who's going to be an all-ACC player at the end of the season, given his numbers. It's partly Khalil Herbert, obviously. He's a good kick returner, too. But it's partly that offensive line. It's just opening gaping holes for him. I don't think Liberty has the personnel to deal with that. So if Liberty's going to somehow shock the world, it's going to have to be shootout style. And my guess is, given the competition that you described, and given that Hokies offense, and given that even the Hokies, remember, in some of those bad games defensively, they were missing a dozen or more players for COVID-related reasons. They're not at full strength right now, but they have a lot of those guys back. I expect Virginia Tech to win, but it's certainly fun to see this in-state matchup, or in the Commonwealth matchup, I guess, given that nobody would have expected that 2 months ago.
Well, I find it fascinating, David, to hear you go with the offensive lines here, because they are absolutely outstanding for Virginia Tech and Notre Dame in these two matchups, because usually when you're breaking down college football these days, it seems like, well, can that defense get off the field? Can you contain that quarterback? Can you get a pass rush? And how do you cover those two elite receivers? We were talking about the SEC with Alabama, with those guys they've got down there with Waddle and Smith. So the offensive lines, in a lot of ways, in some of these bigger matchups now, are starting to become more front and center in these college football collision courses, are they not?
Yeah, that's true. And, a lot of coaches will tell you that one of the reasons that the SEC in football has been the dominant conference, not every year, but most years, is that, I've heard college coaches say, God made a whole lot of safeties, cornerbacks, and wide receivers. He did not make a whole lot of athletic 300-pounders. There just aren't as many of them to go around. And the SEC, in most years, not really famous for their quarterbacks. Now, there are exceptions to that, of course. But you want to find big athletic offensive linemen, the first place to go is the Southeastern Conference. And, everybody else gets, some of those guys, but sometimes they get leftovers. Well, Notre Dame and Virginia Tech this season have built their success in large part on their offensive lines. I'm trying to think if there's anybody else in the ACC that fits that description. But tonight, for example, Notre Dame's players have been quoted saying, we need to stop the Clemson running back Travis Etienne. And they believe they have the advantage against Clemson's offensive line. Etienne, of course, is an All-American and the leading rusher in the history of the Atlantic Coast Conference. I mean, a future NFLer for sure. And Notre Dame's mindset is, we can dominate the Clemson offensive line. We can slow down Travis Etienne, and if we have to, we'll take our chances with that freshman quarterback, DJ. That's at least the mindset. And again, the offensive line plays into that mindset.
Dave, I'm going to go back to the Virginia Tech Liberty. I love what Liberty's doing, yes, but the opponents they played, I think somebody said the record was like 4-28. You mentioned this. I just don't see them taking down Tech. Give them a game, yes. Clemson, Notre Dame. I got to ask you before I want to transition into hoops. Your gut feeling, who wins tonight?
My gut feeling is that Clemson wins. And the main reason for that is every time I bet against them, I lose. They actually, Coach, this sounds crazy, but if you go all the way back to the 1930s in college football, Clemson's current regular season winning streak is 36 games, and that is the fourth longest in the last 80-plus years of college football.
Wow.
That's how rare. They have 28 straight wins against ACC opponents. That's the second longest in the history of a league that's almost 70 years old. They are on the road. They are missing key players. I think it's going to be a good game. I really do. But I guess I'm having flashbacks to 2 years ago. I know it's different personnel, but Clemson 30, Notre Dame 3 in that college football playoff semifinal matchup. And remember, thanks to COVID, it's not going to be the usual home field advantage in South Bend. It's going to be a watered-down version of that. That would be more fun to watch, 90,000 there? I forget. With a true freshman quarterback from Clemson trying to call his signals. It's a shame, but the Irish won't have, the usual power of a home field advantage because of the pandemic.
I'm with you. I want Notre Dame so bad, but I think Clemson wins a close one. Now, round ball. Hatfield and I are arguing. He's going to take UVA. He said, what do you want, UVA or the field? I said, I'm taking the field. He's got UVA winning the ACC in basketball. So now we're going to have to let you settle this argument. What's your feeling here?
Well, as is so often the case, it all depends on how you word the question, because if you ask me who's my pick to win the ACC, my answer is UVA. But if I were at a betting window and you said either UVA or the field, I got to take the field.
Thank you. That's all I need to hear.
You know what I mean? It all depends. Like, I'm a voter, and my ballot is actually due at the ACC office by the end of this weekend. I'm glad you just reminded me of that. My ballot will have UVA, number one. But the way you word the question, hey, Duke has a chance. Carolina was bad last year, going to be really good this year. Syracuse could be really good. Florida State could be really good again. So I think it'll be one of those five in all likelihood, with the Cavaliers being kind of my favorite. But I don't see a huge gap between UVA and teams like Duke and Carolina.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense on the surface, David. I'm not going to fight you off on it, although I will tell you, this might be Tony Bennett's most talented team. I know the national championship team from a couple years ago would argue that with Jerome and Guy and Hunter and Mamadi. But UNC and Duke, I think they've had more pros than they have this year. I think the ACC is going to be strong again. It's probably between, in my eyes, them and the Big 12 for the best conference this year. We know COVID's hanging over everybody. But, man, Tony Bennett, he's a hard guy to go against, and he keeps doing it year after year without all these ballyhooed five-star recruits.
Agree. And it's going to be fun because after a football season where we all know it starts with Clemson, and then there are intriguing teams like Notre Dame and Miami and maybe even Carolina and Virginia Tech. That depth you're describing in basketball, just like I mentioned earlier, the SEC is usually sort of the king of the hill in football, not every year but most years. I think the ACC deserves that label in men's basketball, not every year but most years. And I'll tell you what, 6 teams are going to be good to great. UVA, Duke, and Carolina on the top tier, up with Syracuse, Florida State, and Louisville on the 1B tier. And then there's a chance that a Georgia Tech, an NC State, a Pitt, a Miami, a Clemson, or even a Virginia Tech could become an NCAA tournament caliber team. So that's 6 teams I know are going to be good, 6 teams that have a chance to be good, and really only 2 or 3 at the bottom that I don't think have a whole lot of optimism this year. That's quality depth right there in a 15-team basketball league.
Absolutely. A lot of quantity, a lot of quality, and a lot of quality quantity, if you will. That is David Glenn of The David Glenn Show, ACC Sports Journal, and The Athletic. Always a pleasure, my friend. You enjoy the weekend, and we'll talk soon.
All right, Matt, Coach, great to be with you guys again. Enjoy the games.
Thanks,
You
David.
got it. That is David Glenn with us here, giving us a college football breakdown and a snapshot preview of the college hoop season across the ACC. We've got buy or sell plus the pick three. It's all coming your way on 757 Saturday Sports Talk on Ed Young's favorite radio station. What is it?
Now, this one I'm going to get right. ESPN Radio 94.1.